Okey doke. Well, good morning, everybody. It's Wednesday, March 10th, and the first thing we're going to deal with this morning is S61. It's an act relating to agricultural land and use value appraisal of that. I believe with small, under small solar arrays, I believe. And we have Rebecca Sanderoff with us,
Yep.
and we have Michael somebody with us from Forest and Parks. And I guess it's Commissioner Snyder. So welcome both of you to the meeting. And I know I worked with Rebecca off and on this fall, putting this bill together, and this is our first take on the bill. I believe it's down in finance, maybe, but we'll deal with it. I didn't know, but if we decide to move forward with it, we'd tuck it in our miscellaneous ag bill or something, and if they aren't going to deal with it down there and move it down to them that in that fashion. So I don't know, Rebecca, if you want to lead off and give the committee a little overview of the ideas that you folks had behind this, and
Yeah, sure thing.
and then we can switch to Commissioner Snyder.
Yeah, that sounds perfect. So yes, I'm Rebecca Sanderoff. I'm the new Deputy Commissioner at the Department of Taxes. I started in December. I have a longer history at the tax department as a senior fiscal analyst, but it's very exciting to be back in this role. I'm doing legislative and policy stuff. So just by way of a little introduction, I haven't been in this committee yet, but very excited to be working with you guys. And thanks for letting us present our current use housekeeping proposals in this bill S61. And just to clarify, I think this is the only committee that has this bill right now. So we would,
it isn't down in finance.
Not that I'm aware of, no. So getting it there would be great, but we actually don't. None of these have revenue impacts or very de minimis revenue impacts. So I guess actually, yeah, probably a more appropriate vehicle would be the one that you thought about, like in a miscellaneous ag bill or something like that. But that's in your wheelhouse. I'll just let you know it's in here. There's actually two proposals in this bill that we think of as current use housekeeping, but of course, with current use, even housekeeping can get a bit complex. So one of these proposals, as Senator Starr mentioned, is about changing the definitions in the program to allow for the land underlying like a solar panel from 1 to a very small array, less than 1/10 of an acre, to remain in the program. Because as the state of things are now, if a person throws up a solar panel on enrolled land, the tax department has to remove a fraction of an acre from the program. It's a lot of administrative work. It triggers a very tiny land use change tax, which can be dramatically different depending on where the land is, if it's in Charlotte versus somewhere in the middle of the state. And it just doesn't make a lot of practical sense as is. So the version of the proposal to allow the land underlying a very small solar array to remain in current use, that the original language we proposed actually just discussed ag land, and we quickly realized that we needed to work with our colleagues in FPR to address an equity issue where this should be allowed on forests in a land enrolled as forest land. And I don't want to use the wrong technical term, so that's where I'll let Commissioner Snyder weigh in on this. But we've come to the committee today with a new recommendation for how to frame this in the language to S61, and actually sent that to Linda, and it's available on the committee page. So as currently drafted, we changed the definition of agricultural land. And in this new recommendation that we worked on with our colleagues in Forest Parks and Rec, we're changing the definition of development instead. And by making the change in that area of the language, it can apply to both types of enrolled land. So Commissioner Snyder, I don't know if you want to clarify something that I don't know, talked unclearly over there, but this would be that.
No, thanks, Rebecca. You did great, and that's exactly it. Ours is a very small piece here, and appreciate Rebecca and her team reaching out and being aware and wanting to make sure we didn't have an unintended consequences on the forest land category, and we don't. We support this suggestion for using as Rebecca described, using the definition of development to get at this as opposed to the enrollment category. And for it, quite simply, it works for us. We see the need, we're open to it, it's de minimis, and this is a intelligent way to go about it from our perspective. We support.
Well, wouldn't that, I mean, if you had that little 1/10 of an acre, I mean, I can see where it'd be a nightmare chopping that out of the current use plan, but also, why couldn't you, have grazing for sheep or goats, or even, small animals could graze in under one of these things as well, couldn't they?
Yeah, I think presumably that's the case.
I mean, you've got the Deputy Commissioner of Taxes and the forest freak here, so I'm not sure we're equipped to speak to that. I would agree, they could. It would seem reasonable. I've seen it happen, and I guess this would allow that. It wouldn't prohibit it. It just means you don't have to have the agricultural or forest land use on this 1/10 of an acre. You could. So it's not saying you can't graze. It's just saying you don't have to.
Yeah. Chris?
Thank you. Rebecca, I've been looking into this and finance has, not this particular bill, but the issue more broadly, and finance looked at it last year because we were trying to make sure that the way we tax solar arrays broadly outside of the ag question is consistent, and developers, it's not always consistent. So help me understand something. As I understand, state law says if I put solar on my land, that the property value of that land is not allowed to really change. Instead, the property tax from the solar, which is of value, will be driven by the amount of production of that solar, the capacity, the energy. Right. So we have long ago figured out, because what has happened in some towns is that, you have your parcel, it was worth 200 grand, then you put solar on it. Now that's worth something as if it were a business. And the towns have said, oh, well, you're making a bunch of money here. Now your parcel's worth 350 grand. And that wasn't fair because people wouldn't go into it if there was this, not sure how they're going to evaluate it. So I think what we have said in law is your parcel's still worth 200 grand. We're going to tax you on your capacity. So, so I just want to make sure I have that right.
And the only clarification I'd add to that is that the uniform capacity tax applies to arrays that produce energy over 50 something.
Right. No, 50 kW.
Again, tax commissioner or tax deputy, and not super.
I think that's right.
Yeah. So and then solar capacity under that is just exempt, and that exemption is something that I believe originally had a sunset, and maybe the sunset was removed, and it's just for such small panels, like a couple roof panels, I think the legislature has continued to really let those remain exempt to
the under 50 is basically what you'd put on your house.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
Small. So my question is this, and I've been looking into it, by the way, just as an aside, because I think we should be treating storage similarly. That's
Mm.
now a new technology. So I'm working on language for that. That's just an aside. What I guess I don't understand is the principle that the state has applied is to say, we're not going to think about your land as changing. We're just going to, it's almost as if you put the solar up on a balloon. We're just going to deal with that up there, and we're divorcing it from land value. And so my question is, did tax not feel like that principle was enough to leave use value alone? I mean, it strikes me that the principle we've applied is we're divorcing it from your land. And so why is this really necessary? Do you not have that ability under your own, interpretive powers?
Right. Yeah, I think that's a really great question. And what I'll say is that this has been flagged as an issue for, our legal staff that work on current use. So I think that, I know that the understanding now in the department is that there is not enough flexibility in the statute. And it could be because of, we need to look at specific statute around current use program and definitions like this. So currently we don't feel like we have the flexibility to just make that call as a, oh, this is an administrative pain in the butt. We don't want to do it. And that's why we're thinking of this as a housekeeping provision, because there's really, it does kind of like make sense with the rest of the way, as you've pointed out, that solar is treated and that, we just like to administer the program.
It's clarifying language, basically, right?
Yeah.
It sets the record straight so the lawyers won't be able to chew it up.
Well, I'll be honest and say, whenever I see a current use bill with Senator Starr's name attached, I approach it with skepticism. But this one seems to be quite straightforward.
I'm helping your reputation, Senator Starr.
Well, a question for either of you, Rebecca or Mr. Chair. Any reason you picked a tenth of an acre? That's very small. Is that hinged to what we think the capacity is, or as you say, you do see grazing land underneath panels? So why so small?
That's another really great question. And honestly, I think we were just trying to make sure that this housekeeping proposal was viewed that way. We don't want to be making a policy change to like what you're primarily using your current use parcel for. So this tenth of an acre, we talked about it in PVR. There was someone who had some solar attached to their house that was like a nice measuring stick. So this is like, you can think about it as like about like 65 by 65 feet, like the amount that would underlie something that could like power a house, or it's hard to come up with the right example for this.
A mobile home would basically, you'd have a hard time fitting a mobile home on one of these lots.
Right. Yeah, we didn't want there to be concern that we were, undermining the program. But there's also, so this would probably, like the way I can see this coming out is if someone, has a small solar array, they want to use the power their home, but just because of siting, it's not on the house site plot. It has to be sited like in their enrolled land, a little farther off. And so this would allow that to happen without any current use consequences.
Yeah. The other questions? No.
I would just say this fits in my premise of diversification for our farm families, Mr. Chair. So nice job finding this one.
No, well, it found me. I didn't go looking for it. Rebecca found me somehow. I don't know how. Probably Schneider signed her onto me or something.
Rebecca, you should find new.
The other part.
I'm learning so much today.
The other part, there's two items, right?
Yeah. And we can move on to the second one. Just the one reminder I will say about this first one is that as drafted in S61 right now, we don't have this allowance extended to forest land. So we would ask that the committee or Senator Starr submit an amendment with the change in language and let Abby draft that up before moving this on. And I'll shoot that in an email afterwards just to to make sure everyone has the language, but it's what Linda's posted online. So the second proposal is very much even more housekeeping. This is changing the current requirement for the current use advisory board to approve
Yes.
our forms every year. The current use advisory board is totally fine with this as well. They only meet annually. And so just like it creates just, unnecessary administrative cyclical issue when, someone in current use is like, oh, I want to add line 6A to clarify something, or, we want to change the form design. We want to make it more intuitive, having to wait for this annual meeting of the current use advisory board when, they have plenty of actual things to do and, just generally approve the form every year. So both bodies agree that this would just be a nice administrative easing for us.
Well, this particular issue, one of our colleagues, when she was in the House, got to be on a special committee for current use. And that was the major issue that came out of that summer study, was all these people were not, they were selling off land, they were changing the use of land, and they were never calling in and telling the tax department. So this annual report, I believe, came along at that point in time. And did you put a 2 or 3 year reporting on that, Rebecca?
And so one thing I'll clarify is that if we do have annual reporting to the current use advisory board, this would not change that. This is only removing the requirement for them to review the tax form itself that people need to submit with changes. So, and I'm sorry, I don't know more about our annual reporting requirements. I could find out about that.
I wonder if Senator Starr is thinking of the forest management activity reports or the ag certifications.
Well, ag certification, we used to have it so that if you did change, you had to call in and report your changes. But Allison changed that all around when she was in House Ways and Means. And I think we changed it a little bit since then, but it's a nightmare because people, you guys I think tax has to send out a notice and then it gets put behind the toaster and the date runs out and it just causes a lot of grief. People get threatened. They're going to, have to take their land out of current use and it's, I think, isn't this issue to straighten that out to some extent?
This would be different. This is, I should let Rebecca speak to it, but those exist. There may be issues there. I won't speak to the ag side. On the forest land side, it's been an issue forever. It used to be an annual conformance report that had to be filed by February 1st. And if you didn't, you did run the risk of being removed from the program administratively, and it's terrible. That was then changed from an annual requirement to you only have to fill out this form and send it in to us, and we share it with tax when you have activity, which has its own issues. But those are separate from what's being proposed here, which is about the current use advisory board, which is the statutory board that establish the use value rates for ag and forestry annually and deal with that kind of oversee. And when the tax department, PVNR, wants to make a change in their forms, they have to wait a year to get this board together. And this is simply clarifying that they could do it without having to wait for that. It's not affecting these other
not
reporting requirements, correct? How'd I do, Rebecca?
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, that makes sense as well. So are there questions from the committee in that second change? Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So based on what Michael and Rebecca just said, it sounded like what you were intending to do, Mr. Chair, is already being done, and that this second change might not need to happen. Is that what I'm hearing?
No, the board, the tax department wants to be able to change the form without waiting a year to come back and, wait a year before they can change the form on the evaluation, the way I believe it is.
Right. I see this as a distinct issue that basically only involves our administrative processes at
Okay,
tax.
all right, thank you.
It doesn't directly affect any enrolled landowners in either category.
Hmm.
It's only indirectly in as much as
Are
the
any of the rest of you getting cut out? Because I'm not hearing a thing.
No, I think it's just you, Mr. Chair.
You got to reboot, Bobby.
I like that. Where his face is frozen, that looks good.
Yeah, you're
So
lucky.
I'm froze on your screen then.
Yeah, but we could still hear every word you say. There you go.
There we
Well, I'm
go.
gonna be using some words that might be best for you not to hear if this thing keeps acting up.
I suppose I should say, just for the record, just sort of a disclosure, I guess, that I am a member of the Current Use Advisory Board as an ex officio by dint of title, along with the Secretary of Agriculture. There are many citizen members, foresters, listers, farmers, but just, to be clear, I am and as such, I do support the proposal from PVNR, from tax.
Yeah. So, Chris,
Well, I have sort of a related question, not necessarily about the language, so I don't have to do it now, but while we've got the commissioner here, I'd love to ask him if at some point.
yeah, sure, shoot.
In terms of forest land enrolled in current use, the whole premise has been use, right? That it's a working landscape, but there's more and more pressure on folks who are interested in just leaving forest land totally untouched. No doubt there's a term for that, but in particular around carbon sequestration, and there's always this debate about what's how do you make it healthier. I'm just curious, and that would not qualify you if you just left your parcel alone in a wild state. That would not qualify you for the tax benefit of current use. Has there been a discussion? I mean, is that something we should be looking at when we shift our perspective a little bit from the landscape in terms of for our aesthetic versus for as a partner in the climate crisis? Have you thought about that? I'm not saying we would do it here, but it just reminds me of a question I've been wanting to ask you.
Great. I'm glad you did, and happy to develop this further with you, but also happy to speak to it now. And the short answer is yes. I'm thinking about this a lot. And in fact, there's some activity in the other body right now with
Oh,
wow, that's double Bobby. That's impressive. Shall I keep going here? Are we good? Sorry, just a little distracting. Yeah, so, but so yes, there's discussions in the House Natural Resources Committee as we speak. I testified yesterday on a draft request that would, trying to still sort out what it's intended to do, but I think it's basically in trying to see, is there a way to have parcels that over which there is a forever wild easement? Could they be eligible? And as you say, with such an easement, any easement, it's not picking on a forever wild easement, but any legal constraint on an owner of record's ability to manage or make decisions about the vegetation renders that ineligible. So we're looking at how to get around that, how to fix that, how to reduce the barrier for that kind of enrollment. That said, I want to back up and make something very clear that's very important, is that, yes, the original conceit was this was for productive use of ag and forest land, and it should be taxed according to that current use of productive. So based on and that's what the Current Use Advisory Board does, is attempt to establish annually the use value rate. What is the economically productive capacity per acre for forest land in that use? And that's what you get taxed on. That's been the original, and it's been a really important thing for a long time for a lot of reasons. And then in 2008, when I was a county forester, worked with a team of folks that led to some legislation to create a new eligibility category within the forest land for what we termed ecologically significant treatment areas, or ESTAs, as we call them. These are old forests, wetland forests, natural communities of statewide significance. There's a handful of these. And that if you meet the criteria, kind of the ecological criteria, then you can enroll those in current use forest land and not have to manage actively for timber. You still need to have a plan to protect those values that are important, but you don't. So we've actually already created that. Early in my time as commissioner, we eliminated the cap that had originally been added to that provision of expanded eligibility. So long as there was a minimum of 20 acres of continuing forest management on the parcel. So we have created that, and I'm quite proud of that actually. And we have enrollments for these special places, riparian areas. And so there is now, unlike the original, there is an ability for forest landowners to enroll portions of their land that qualify and not have to manage them for timber output. What's more, we, under existing authority that the commissioner has to establish the standards for the program, I have recently proposed an expansion to the old forest category to allow forests that aren't quite old yet, but are trending in the right direction and have the characteristics building towards complex old forests to be allowed. So just expanding the definition of old forest to allow increased eligibility. All of this, Senator Pearson, I am offering is by way of suggesting that, yes, we have been thinking about it and evolving and adapting to the importance of, as we learn, of the multiple benefits of forests and their functions. So that's happening. And now we're working with the House Committee on helping get to a place where we reduce the barriers for those enrollments. And what's the appropriate mechanism that can be practically implemented, that's not expensive, that won't make the colleagues at tax heads explode when, as we try to, easements are complex. They're 70, 80 pages. I am quite familiar with many, and with lots, and they differ from parcel to parcel, and they can differ among acres within a parcel. So there's a lot of details there, but it's not quite that simple, but we're working towards trying to provide that. And it does, I'll finish with this. It is a very big policy question on the kind of the original concept of working lands. And as important as they are, I would just encourage, as eager as I am to adapt and find the right ways to maximize the accrual of public benefit from private lands that we enjoy, these ecosystem services. I would just say, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's been enormously helpful, and we want to be careful with that, even as we look to kind of modernize and expand what we're kind of incentivizing and protecting.
Thank you. Appreciate the overview.
You bet.
Bobby, we muted you when you came on. It was getting a wicked amount of noise.
That was nice of you. I switch machines. So maybe I won't drop off now like I was. No, current use has probably been one of the best land use proposals that we've done in Montpelier. And I don't know, Henry Carse got it started for forestry. I think it was the term before I started in '78.
It was.
And then when I got there, my farmers, they wanted to get dairy in on it and ag land. And Henry had that pretty well sewed up, so they couldn't get in. But we changed it to allow ag land in. And I'll tell you, if we hadn't have had current use, we would have a lot less good ag land and forest land in our state. I don't know if you, Michael or Rebecca, do you know about how many acres we have in current use at the present time, or
Yep.
any of those numbers? You've got that?
Yes, we have just about 2 million acres enrolled in forest land. and what is it, 300,000 acres in ag land. I think there's 2.3 million acres overall, and the vast majority is in forest land.
Yeah.
16,000 parcels. I'll speak to the forest land category. 16,000 parcels, 1.9 something million acres at this point. It's significant. We heard testimony yesterday from environmental groups and some biologists saying it was impressive. They said it's by far the most important and consequential conservation program in their state's history.
Yeah.
And it's a gold standard among other states when you compare what we do and how we do it. And holding the towns harmless since Act 61 or Act 60 is really something else. You know, that, and full disclaimer, I have forest land enrolled in the program. I also have a conservation easement on my land held by Vermont Land Trust. But the town, you know, I pay significantly reduced tax because of my activity and stewardship, but the town is held harmless. We're all sharing in that.
Well, and
amazing.
it's worth a lot to the town to have that in current use. It's, you know, growing better timber or growing better crops or good
And-
crops. You know,
and
you
my-
travel over to New Hampshire and you see these farms that grown up to brush and stuff. I don't think they have a program anywhere near like what we have.
No, they don't.
What about, Michael, maybe if you know the numbers, how many acres did we have extracted from current use in the past year or two? Do you have any idea on that?
No, that one, it's the PVNR produces an amazing report every year with lots of data. So perhaps we can get that for you folks to have access to, which includes all those kind of, you know, trends and changes. It's really impressive. A lot of data there.
Yeah, I'm happy to follow up
And I
on
don't off the top of my head, I'm sorry, I don't know the recent figures. Since we changed the land use change tax, the penalty, it's much more significant now, eliminating the pro rata approach. It's now development, any development, which can include cutting contrary to your plan, subdividing, et cetera. The tax is 10% of the fair market value is established as a standalone, not kind of prorated by the total acreage. It can be very significant. And I think that's had a deterrent effect.
Because the other members hear this too, but every now and then, you know, we'll hear something, well, we're losing all of our land, you know, it's disappearing, it's being sold off or being developed. And I, you know, of course, I'm up here in the kingdom. You don't see a lot of, you don't see or hear of a lot of land being taken out of current use and being developed. And, you know, I think sometimes they blow smoke trying to get stronger laws in place to prohibit or to slow down the sale of land. But do you see a lot of that, Michael? A lot of land moving out?
No, I don't think so. We have increasing enrollments. Enrollments continue to rise, though this is really interesting when you tease it apart. The number of parcels enrolled in forest land is increasing. The number of acres is increasing, but not at the same rate. The number of parcels are increasing greater, and that's largely reflecting that it's possible, at least, to take 100 acres, one enrollment, subdivide it into 25, and they're all still qualifying eligible parcels. And now you have 4 parcels for the same 100 acres. So there is continuing enrollment increases, I go this way, but the two lines are one is much increasing at a higher rate, the number of parcels versus the number of acres, but both are in fact rising, as opposed to parcels being removed. We have a few adverse inspections, as we call them, because we have a responsibility to follow up and make sure folks are following their plan. It's a statutory requirement for us to do those inspections. And on occasion, we find that someone did cut when they shouldn't or where they shouldn't have or how, and that's development. That triggers the development penalty. We file an adverse inspection, and we get a handful of those each year, only a few really. And then we have a process that we investigate, look into it, and there's an appeal process that comes to me, and eventually sometimes I say, you know what, that was just accident, mistake, misfortune, and we're we're gonna let that one be and try to mitigate and maybe fix what went wrong. But when not, then we find that, no, it needs to be removed. The lien remains, remember, there's a lien recorded in the land records for all enrollments. That's the state's hook here. They are removed from the program. They go back to ad valorem taxation, and but the lien remains, and they pay the land use change tax for the developed portion. And that's a lot, beginning with losing the benefit, the equitable tax treatment. And then it goes from there with the added penalty.
Weren't you the commissioner that took on Weyerhaeuser?
I knew this was coming. Yes, all the way to the Supreme Court. It was
Yeah.
not Weyerhaeuser at the time. It was Plum Creek Timber, but
Yeah, Plum Creek.
that's how we forged our relationship, Senator Starr, you and me. I was just a rookie commissioner, and I barely knew where the State House was, and I inherited that.
Yeah, you did well on that. They're back in, aren't they?
Yes.
Yeah. You know what causes some of that division in the additional parcels, I think, is like in my family, you know, we got thousands of acres up here, and it used to be my dad and my granddad, but now, you know, there's other cousins involved, and so as you lose generations, that land gets divided up amongst other family members, so the ownership of it, and so then you divide up, you know, into smaller parcels. I think that occurs in a lot of families, and as you move forward, of course, there's going to be more parcels if there's children that come along. But that doesn't mean that it's being chopped up and sold off. It's just being divided up amongst family members in a different proportion. Are there other questions for Rebecca or Michael? If not, Rebecca, we'll get that change made in that amendment to the bill. We'll do like a draft 2 or 3 or whatever to get that fixed, and we'll you know, move. I believe the committee seems to be in support of it. We haven't taken a vote or anything, but we'll get that moving, and as long as I think we'd be better off to send it out in a package, because it's a pretty small part, and we'll load it into the miscellaneous bill and move it with that, you know, sometime along. Did you folks have any other questions for us?
That sounds great. Thanks so
Yeah.
much.
Thank you.
Michael, I don't want to ruin your day, but we're going to move that 5 million for your parks to ag this afternoon.
You just ruined my day, Senator.
Well, thanks a lot, guys, for coming in and for the you know, I think that's a good improvements to the law. So thanks again, and if you have any questions, I'll have Linda or the draft person, Rebecca, send you a copy of the rewrite so you can double check it and stuff.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. Well, very good. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Good to see you all. Stay well.
Anthony, I haven't thanked you yet, but I thanked Brian earlier for your work yesterday. I'm really impressed getting the marijuana bill. looks like Pearson's speechless on it.
That's a first.
But last night at our chairs meeting, both Senator Sears and Senator White wanted us to take a look at the material that I guess you folks in government ops and your chair there and the chair of judiciary had questions in regards to small plots of marijuana being grown on ag land or something. So I don't know, but they want the bill out this week if we can figure out what the heck to do. And I don't know squat about that particular bill. I haven't paid much attention to it because I figured it was being done down in the other committees. So you want to explain to the other three of us what you wanted to do or change to that before we get Graham's coming in, I guess. And I don't know if Mark Hughes was coming. Did you have a couple of witnesses, Anthony?
Yeah, there's a couple of them that are going to be coming. Mark, there's this fellow from the what are they called? The Growers Association. Is that the name of it? And they brought up a lot of issues in GovOps that GovOps didn't really want to deal with, around the size of growing plots and whatnot. They're concerned that basically we end up with like a commoditized marijuana market, the way big guys take over the market, the way they do with milk and whatnot. So they have some ideas that they want us to take a listen to. I'm really not sure like what we're going to do about it, to be perfectly honest. I mean, because we've only got today, because the bill's got to move before crossover. So my guess is that what we want to do is listen to what they have to say and think about whether or not we want to make a couple recommendations back to the judiciary or GovOps to like try to move forward on some of these ideas. Because I don't know. I mean, we're only going to be able to do so much.
Well, why haven't we got until Friday?
Well, they want to move the bill out on Friday. Yes, we have until Friday. That's true. I think that
Jeanette said yesterday that she wanted the GovOps committee to vote it out on Friday. Well, we're not actually voting it out either.
right,
It's a judiciary bill, okay?
right.
So the parts the parts that had more to do with government operations and agriculture, they wanted those individual committees to just take a look at it and make recommendations about whether they should change anything by amendment to the bill. But it's a judiciary bill. It's not a GovOps bill, and it's certainly not our bill. So we're under no obligation necessarily. But when we began to talk, for instance, with Graham about the size of an operation, a very small local farmer growing, they want to put restrictions in about what that scale should look like, whether it's an acre thing or whether it's a yield. And so I'm not clearly understanding everything either. So that's why Jeanette felt that it would be better for us to at least hear from Graham and then make a decision about whether we wanted to send a recommendation back to her.
Well, I thought we had some kind of we already have in place, like you can do so many plants or something. So would it might be better to stay like with the number of plants that a small producer could do? I mean, it's pretty easy to go in and count the number of plants.
Yeah, there are tiers set up already in the existing legislation, which last year was S54. So there is kind of a weird intersection between what does scale mean and what do tiers mean. And I'm hoping that Graham can clarify that a little bit for us. We just felt like we could at least give them a chance to explain it. That's basically all we wanted to do.
Well, if you're growing this stuff outside, I mean, it's really an agricultural product but I don't, what about the rules and the regs and getting tested and all that good stuff? Sears got that all set up?
Yeah, he didn't bring that up at all with us yesterday.
No, Chris?
I just point out that the Senate in our original S54 had cultivation as an agricultural activity. And so part of, I'm glad to listen, glad to consider it on the merits, but the fact is we're not the impediment to what I think people want. So I hope we won't take too much time because frankly, this is the case where we more or less agree with them and we ran into a buzzsaw in House Ways and Means. And you'll recall we fought like hell to keep the smallest licensed, if that were happening outside on a farm that's currently enrolled in current use, we kept that in current use. That was it was really hard to get that. We're talking about a 1,000 square foot, I think, plot. I mean, it's tiny. And that was
1,000? So a 20 by 50 or something like that?
And and I think if I'm remembering Representative Ansel's concern, she didn't want, new land enrolled, therefore, getting a tax benefit from the rest of us just for marijuana businesses. That was where she was strong. I mean, I'm sort of more interested in strengthening the ag industry, but anyway, my point is it's a bit fruitless for us to pound our head against this wall, in my opinion. I'm open to hearing it. Maybe there's new facts have surfaced, but we're not the impediment here, and
No,
there's a strong impediment on the House side.
So you think regardless of what we do, Ansel just kill it?
Well, that's what she did last year.
Well, why put it in a bill that has to go to her room?
Well, if we're talking about current use, which I think is part of the discussion, it impacts taxes, right?
I'm not sure it does have anything to do with what Graham wants to talk about, Chris.
Well, he
Anthony,
wants
did
to-
you get that idea?
No, I mean, it never came up yesterday or the last couple of days. It hasn't
We
come up
weren't
that
talking
way.
about current use.
Well, they've been talking about considering it agriculture.
Right.
But all agricultural land is not in current
Right.
use. And
I
You
realize, but
you might put one side the road in current use and not the other side the road or if,
anyway,
if
I just wanted people to understand the history of to a large degree, the Senate has expressed our support for what I believe folks are after. And so, that's just the hard reality of the history.
so if that's her big hang up, why not, if we can draft something up, I'm sure Michael could, why not just say that you cannot be in commercial, you can't be in the commercial line of business with marijuana and be in current use. They'd have to extract out that, that little bit, which is way smaller than what we just talked about for the solar array.
Right.
That's 4,000 square feet, 4,200. But anyways, what time were they coming in?
10:30.
10:30.
10:30.
So,
10:30.
oh, not until 10:30?
Right. We thought this other thing was going to go longer.
Well, yeah, we thought it might go longer, but it went really, really well. Before we get away from it, do you think the plan to put that we just talked about, S 67, is it 67? I think so.
61.
61, load that in the miscellaneous bill when it comes over? Is that
Sure.
agreeable with
Yeah,
you?
that probably works. Yep.
Yeah.
So, so that's what we'll do with S 61. This 54, who does the drafting on that particular bill?
Michelle Childs.
So I don't think she's scheduled to be with us.
No, she was
No,
in
she said-
another. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, she said she couldn't be here today.
Yeah,
And she also said that she didn't feel necessarily like this kind of stuff was her thing, and that she suggested that if we were going to do any drafting, that Michael should do it.
oh, well, Michael certainly could do it. Linda, do you know if Michael's around this morning or is he tied up?
I'm not sure. I'll check and let you know.
See if, if he could comment, to listen to what the heck we're going to hear at 10:30 if you could.
And I think part of it, going back to what Christopher said, I mean, I think part of what we're doing here this morning is we're giving them an opportunity to talk to us as from an agricultural perspective, where they feel very frustrated that this conversation has been going on for a while, and they feel like they have not been able to be heard or have a conversation with people like us who deal with agricultural issues. So I think they just feel a need to be heard as well. I mean, I don't know if they're expecting miracles or anything, but I think they're really grateful that we're willing to listen to them. I mean, they've been going back and forth on email, just saying how thankful they are that they have an opportunity to come talk to us, because they just feel like they have an agricultural interest and they've been ignored. I don't know whether ignored is the right word, but they haven't had the opportunity to share their thoughts with people who they feel aligned with.
Yeah, but that's like going to the apple orchard to see the apple trees and not being allowed to pick any apples.
Right.
Yeah, I'd like to, if we're going to fool with this, we're going to try to get an apple off the tree or two at least.
And we could recommend things back to the Judiciary Committee. They could say no to them as well. But I think if we feel that it should be considered agriculture, for example, I think we should say that, and say what we really think it should be. And then it doesn't mean Judiciary is going to accept it or that the Senate will accept it. But I still think we should express our feeling about what we think we should be doing.
Yeah. And what about Chris, getting back to your thing about diversifying, why, if you had, if you were a veggie grower even, and you had a small piece of your property that you grew this product on, why couldn't you make a little money selling that stuff maybe, and it would subsidize your family or the rest of the business, or there must be a profit in that, or people wouldn't be doing it.
I think there's significant profits, and that is the premise, and that is the what we've set up, and we've set it up in a way that attempts to spread it out. I mean, we have the some have said we have done more than others to democratize it, to make sure it's not concentrated in a few big facilities. Where you intersect with ag policy is tricky. As we know, there's a lot of benefits to be considered a farm, and people are leery about, a lot of cannabis is grown indoors, and, do you take a warehouse in downtown Milton, and consider that ag land?
No.
I think there's a reasonable question there. I don't think that's what we mean to do. And so where do you draw the line? I mean, these are, we also enacted this bill 5 months ago. I mean, you know, we don't have a single plant in the ground. So, you know, we should look at it. We'll have a robust discussion. But historically, we've been much closer to where these folks are than our counterparts on the other side. And that's just
Also,
Yeah.
in terms of the delay that you mentioned, you know, it's been 5 months, whatever, but there's no cannabis control board yet. So theoretically, some of these things we're talking about should be decisions that are made by the Cannabis Control Board or the advisory committee that's being set up. You know, in GovOps, we basically yesterday we decided that the Cannabis Control Board has to be in place by such a date. I think we were talking like April 1st, which is totally impractical. You know, in terms of the fact that they've been nominated, and actually, I think the governor's office said, somebody told us yesterday that they were starting to do interviews for Cannabis Control Board members, but there's an advisory committee that has to be put together as well. So the advisory committee would advise the Cannabis Control Board on some of these questions, but none of those things exist yet. So, I mean, it could be that with some of these questions that we're being asked to deal with, that maybe they're not decisions that we should make, but that we should recommend that the Cannabis Control Board, you know, delve into these issues with the support of the advisory committee. But, you know, I'll be amazed if they're in place by the end of April or end of May. It just seems like it's been dragging on a long time.
well,
So Chris, you think the law is pretty clear that if you're a small grower, you can only do 1,000 square feet?
yeah, I want to say it's 1,000 square feet. So there's the kinds of licenses you apply for, right? And the smallest one is 1,000 square feet, and that was really a nod towards the idea that we want a low barrier of entry so that people without a lot of resources could get in. So you don't need big capital to back you, kind of thing. And, you know, that'd be a good little business, 1,000 square feet, but it's not, you know, you're not Magic Hat kind of level of profit here, but it's an entry level. Then there's another tier, and I forget where they are, and one even beyond that. In terms of, you know, how we think about whether or not it's agriculture, basically the House didn't want to go there at all. And we fought for, in conference committee, you'll remember I brought this to you all, to just say, well, these little operations, if they're outside, you know, back to the diversification, if a niece on the farm says to the owner, you know, hey, I'd like to try this. I think I can make some money for us and help diversify, help us, you know, whether it's a vegetable farm, dairy farm, whatever. And then she has to say, but we'll just need to unenroll this half an acre. You know, that conversation's not going anywhere. So we fought hard on that one and succeeded. It doesn't carry the other benefits of being considered agriculture in terms of, you know, local zoning and stuff, but at least it carries the tax benefit. So this has been a real part of the discussion, and you know, we passed this law with a Speaker of the House that was opposed, with a governor that was more or less opposed. So we didn't get everything that we all wanted, and you know, folks in the community that wish it was better, you know, that's, of course, they're right, and good on them for coming and asking for more. But sometimes I get a little frustrated with them coming to us because we've been sort of sympathetic, and they leave the people that are really in the way alone. And I just don't understand that as a strategy.
Isn't that always the way? What about, you don't recall what the second tier looks like as far as size?
I mean, we could ask Michelle when she's here. Michelle Childs would know that. I don't remember. Do you guys remember that? Anybody else? I just remember that there was a lot of emphasis on the little plots.
But how many square, don't you have to be like 4 feet or 6 feet apart with these plants to grow them or something?
See, this is
I
where
don't
we need
remember.
Rogers.
Yeah, I don't remember. Yeah, Rogers was a pretty good resource for this.
Well, he
Well,
forgot to get his paperwork. in.
Yeah.
I mean,
But actually, I'm teasing about Rogers, but it's
No.
a good, it's a helpful reminder, because presumably farmers who have gone to growing hemp plants, some of them may want to convert and be in the different hemp plants, right? In the cannabis THC plants. So, but they will face a lot of hurdles. That will not be an easy. It's not as easy as just making that switch because of some of these regulations. But
and have you guys talked about location? Because, we heard earlier, I think that if you were growing hemp and you had a marijuana grower too close to you, you'd get cross-pollination. So do you know if there's regulations on that in place, or has anybody talked about that?
I mean, that's sort of the same dynamic you have with the organic and conventional corn.
The
for instance.
corn, yes.
I don't know that we got to do that in regulation, but presumably the Cannabis Control Board would look into that, and the actors themselves would look into that. There's not, the vision, as I understand it, is unlikely to be big grows outside, which is
No,
concern
it'd be-
for me in other ways. But so I think you're more thinking about more likely to see that as a concern with the artisan growers. But that's such a small plot that I don't know. It seems to me the Vermont scale here is that they're going to know what their neighbors are growing and be able to work together and figure that out.
Because what about, the government, USDA gives away hoop houses to farmers. What about growing like in hoop houses? Do you know if that's allowed for these small plots?
Yeah, there's no prohibition. It has to be secure, right? So there's a theft concern, and we don't want the neighborhood teenagers to be able to go get them. So there's a theft concern from the owner, and there's a public sort of exposure concern. So they have to be secure, I think, is the law, just like it is with the personal growth. But I would guess if you had a fence and then a hoop house, you're fine. I mean, I was at a hemp facility in Charlotte, and it was a massive greenhouse. And they had some hoop houses as well. So for sure, that is an opportunity that, different growers could take advantage of, I believe.
Well, if USDA is promoting hoop houses, they got to grow something,
I just wanted to say, Mr. Chair, that neither Senator Polino and I wanted to blindside this committee, but
No.
it was impressed on us that we really only had today or tomorrow to get folks in to talk about this, because again, Jeanette wanted to, and she's in Judiciary too. Judiciary wants to vote the bill out, I think, by Friday. So,
Yeah.
I think we did it really in the spirit of just being polite and wanting to at least give the folks an opportunity to talk to our committee with no promises made about what we would or wouldn't do. I want to make that clear. So I feel badly that we didn't have time to ask everybody first whether this could happen, because it happened late yesterday afternoon. And when I looked at the agenda, this next period of time looked to be about the only time we could squeeze them in. So with that in mind,
No. No, that's fine. I mean, I just joshing with you guys about thanking you. I mean, ag issues we should deal with, but nobody has said anything about, well, hey, Star, this is an ag issue. You ought to look at it. And when they brought it up last night, I said, well, it's kind of late, but I said, sure, we'll take a look at it and give people an opportunity to come in and be heard, because we got, some time here today and again, even tomorrow, I think we could crowd in a little time if we needed to.
Thank you for coming
Hopefully,
for us.
Michael can come and we might be able to get something drafted up and we'll ship it down to Sears, and hey, if he likes it, fine. If he don't, still fine, Did you guys want to grab a coffee or anything before Graham gets here? And we're back going, guys. We've got some folks that want to talk to us in regards to the S60.
51.
S61 that's down in the Senate Judiciary Committee. We were asked, at the chairs meeting last night, it was suggested by both Chairman Sears and White that they'd like to ask us. They asked us if we would look at the bill in regards to how it might affect or could affect agriculture and the regulations that go with that. And Anthony and Senator Polina and Collmore are both members of the Government Operations Committee, and they brought it to our attention as well. And so I want to welcome you folks to our hearing, our meeting this morning. And we have our draftsman, Michael O'Grady, with us, as well as Linda Lehman. And so I think to get started, Graham, would you want to give us a rough overview of what you'd like to see happen, but in a broad sense of, because we have today and sometime tomorrow, if we're going to do something to pull it together and offer it to Senator Sears, because he has control of the bill. So kind of broadly, could you give us your take on what you'd like to see happen?
Yeah, thank you, Senator, and thank you all for being willing to take us today. I will start broad, and I think the bill is S25 that we were working at, Senator
Yes.
Sears and White on. And, I recognize this is the vehicle right now. Some of these changes may take longer, but I will start broad. I sent everybody in this committee, I think over the weekend, just some of our suggestions, starting with a summary and some findings and some bullet points related to what we feel are some significant barriers that have been put between the agricultural committee and this, the agricultural community and this incoming tax and regulate market for cannabis. So, our goal is really to establish the understanding that outdoor cultivation is fundamentally an agricultural activity, to establish craft licensing structure and the cost of craft licenses, to differentiate between indoor, outdoor, and mixed light cultivation for commercial cultivation, to increase some of the allowances for home cultivation, to institute production caps for all types and scale cultivation license, sort of like a supply management type system, to outline accountability measures for the CCB, which I think is less in the purview of you all. I'll just leave it there because I think that's mostly, what we have is relevant to the Ag Committee. And as some of you, I know the Ag Committees haven't taken testimony over the past few years on what was S54 and is now Act 164. Maybe I'll share some of why we're here. In Act 164, 904A, it states the intent of the General Assembly is to move as much of the illegal cannabis market as possible into the regulated market. for the purposes of consumer protection and public safety. And it's also the intent of the General Assembly to encourage participation in the regulated market by small local farmers. So it's a part of the goal of the Act that small local farmers have access to this market. We also understand that based on the RAPs, an agricultural product is defined as any raw agricultural commodity, as defined in 6 VSA, section 21.6, that's principally produced on the farm and includes products prepared from the raw agricultural commodities principally produced on the farm. So in our perspective, and from the beginning, we always assumed that this was going to be considered an agricultural product and agricultural practice. It was actually pretty late in the game, I believe last March or February, that this provision declaring cannabis production and cannabis itself non-agricultural was put into the bill. That really was sort of the last straw for rural Vermont and NOFA Vermont, to speak for NOFA Vermont, in terms of not supporting this legislation. We also recognize that, hemp, biofuels, crops for alcohol, these are all protected as agricultural products. Yet for some reason, cannabis is going to be considered differently. We even have the recent Vermont Strategic Agricultural Plan, which has briefs for crops for alcohol, has briefs for hemp. We also just understand that there's an existing illicit economy. It includes farmers, it includes cultivators and growers who aren't farmers. And people are going to choose to participate in the legal market or not based on whether they feel like it's worth it to them and whether or not they feel like they're going to continue to be able to make a livelihood from it. And then there's the community of farmers and cultivators who are just expert growers. That's who farmers are. That's what they do. And right now, if this is non-agricultural, it means all the land that's currently in agricultural easements and all the land in current use, except for a narrow provision which Senator Pearson was able to get in, protecting 1,000 square feet of production, which is a very small amount of production, is allowed on current use under particular circumstances. So what we sort of see is that, like, in the name of security and in the name of nuisance and sort of local control, a sweeping regulation was put in declaring this non-agricultural. We really see that there are pathways to have more scale-appropriate regulations put in place to allow control and to at least allow land that's in current use, land that's in agricultural production, that's in agricultural use, to be used to cultivate this plant. So what we try to do is sort of create some of those scale-appropriate regulations, and we really feel like this committee and the Ag committees are the best place to talk about this. So we felt that one clear way we can distinguish between what's agriculture and what's not is outdoor production would be considered agricultural, and indoor and mixed light wouldn't, and we would define those things. We would also put scale limitations on all different licenses, such that even what we propose here, the maximum you could grow outdoor would be 1 acre. Now in the world of cannabis, that can be a significant amount of money, which could add a lot to a farmer's livelihood. And there would be scaled licenses below that. Senator Starr, I see that you look like you maybe want to ask me something. Is that correct? Or should I just keep talking? Should I keep going, or did you want to say something?
Well, I was going to ask you, see, that 1,000 square feet, you wouldn't get many plants. I wouldn't think you'd get many plants on that, but if you could grow, a half an acre or an acre, how many plants can you get on, say, an acre?
That might be a better question for Jeffrey or Josh than myself.
Yeah, well,
and can I quickly just go a little further and then I let them respond to that?
yeah, go ahead.
I got lost a little. So you're right. One of the reasons we felt that one of the limitations in Act 164 is that it doesn't actually differentiate between indoor, outdoor, and mixed light cultivation. So the 1,000 square feet that's currently in Act 164 applies for all of those types of production. But what we've seen, and Jeffrey and Joshua can speak more to this, is that there's a differential in how much you can produce in the course of a year in a seasonal and a temperate climate, outdoor versus indoor versus mixed light. So what we've seen is we borrowed language from Northern California, where there's essentially a 1 to 2 to 4 ratio. So for every 1,000 square feet you have indoor, you're given 4,000 feet outdoor. Because really outdoor, you can only produce between, same with tomatoes, cucumbers, that kind of thing, right? So we really try to differentiate to make sure that not all these industries and these people practicing are treated the same, because they really have significantly different output potentials and also environmental costs, et cetera. So yes, we do propose, the actual base, like small cultivation license going from 1,000 square feet for outdoor producers to 4,000 square feet, and keeping the 1,000 square feet for indoor production. And I'm not sure if that's the level of detail you all want, but I just want to go over the overview and then we can come back. We sort of propose a craft license tier. Is already suggested in the CCB consider a craft license tier. And one of the concerns we have with the law in general is that the legislature made a lot of things very clear for how the integrated licenses and dispensaries would be treated, but they left a lot up to the CCB for everybody else. So we really felt it was appropriate for us to, rather than work with a 3-member unelected body, to work with elected representatives with agricultural expertise to talk about appropriate regulation. So we suggest a craft license tier with costs, with different scales, that essentially creates, a marketplace in and of its own, where a small craft license on a farm can sell to a craft retailer, et cetera. And I can let Jeffrey or Josh go into that a little bit more. I think one of the things that you all understand about farmers is that we are allowed to sell from our farm products principally produced on our farm, through farm stands, through CSA, et cetera. It has a different suite of regulations than a normal retail store would have. And that was also a concern with this crop. How could we make it such that a farmer wouldn't have to buy a cultivation license, a retail license, a processing license to do essentially what they're doing with all their other crops at a scale, and have it be affordable? We have concerns that would not be affordable. So could we make scale appropriate licenses such that a farmer could buy a license, like we call it a small farm license, where they can sell what they produce on their farm and nothing else. They can process what they produce on their farm from their farm or in a CSA. And that's a very different cost. It's a very different standard than it would be to be a full retail store where you're buying in other people's product, where you're selling other people's product, et cetera. So there's just different ways of thinking about this that we think are really important for the Ag Committee to be here to think about with us, to make sure that farmers have ability to really participate, especially small farmers who won't be able to make this work with a wholesale price. We know what commodification of agricultural products looks like. It looks like concentration of the industry, consolidation of the industry. It looks like small farmers and producers having a really hard time, and people really only being able to compete on a commodity of scale kind of system. So what we're trying to do is just create some options for small producers to be able to participate and make some money here, so we can have as many people as possible participating in this market, as opposed to fewer people, larger operations, a lot more indoor warehouse growing, as opposed to more outdoor growing like we're used to seeing with hemp and just on our farms and part of our farmscapes. We really feel like this could be a critical part of a lot of farmers' livelihoods going forward. You could grow a very small amount and supplement your agricultural business and actually make a much more decent livelihood for your family. Lastly, some of the concerns we have are around, from an agricultural perspective at least, around required background checks for seasonal employees. And if you can imagine, just Jeffrey and Josh can probably speak more to this as well, but with an outdoor production, you have a very narrow window of time where you're actually going to need to have seasonal employees there to help with the harvest. And it might be extremely challenging to get back cannabis ID cards for all these people sort of in that time period. We also make some suggestions around caregiver allowances. Caregivers are the people who medically provide cannabis to people in the community, but they're not associated with dispensaries. So that's sort of like a small grower, but this is sort of like a small dispensary. It's an individual who grows for a limited number of people. And Jeffrey can speak more to that. So I think I sort of just spoke to our overall intentions, some of the findings supporting them, and some of the ideas we're trying to bring to the table, from outdoor production being an agricultural activity to differentiating between indoor, mixed, light, and outdoor cultivation. I didn't really touch much on the production caps, but for example, we proposed that the largest scale of indoor production have a cap. You can't just come in and build as big of a building as you want. We think about this in a way that we try to make sure this cannot become a commodity. That this can maintain, we can maintain a high quality product, maintain a product that achieves just incomes for people who are growing it, and we make sure that it's not exploitative to the environment or becoming a concern for localities, like we've heard in terms of nuisance or security, et cetera. So that's just an introduction, and I'll pass it back to you, Senator Starr, and let you bring in Jeffrey or Josh as you see appropriate.
Yeah, thank you, Graham. I think you got the pickup already overloaded. You gave us a pretty good load, I'd say. But thank thanks a lot. There's certainly a lot there to think about and figure out. So Josh or Gregory, one of you want to go before the other, or?
I kind of yield to you on that, Jeffrey. If you'd like to jump in here, feel free, or I can give just a brief background on Trace and our point of view on these amendments. I'm happy to.
Sure, go ahead.
All right. Well, hello to everyone in the committee. Thank you for having us here. I am a co-founder of Trace. For those of you that don't know, we make seed to sale tracking software for the industry. We currently administer the state's hemp program. Seed to sale tracking, of course, is a requirement for legal cannabis industries. Our software is built with farmers in mind, equitable access in mind, and the industry in mind. A lot of the early solutions in the industry were not built with agricultural processes in mind. So they've gotten in the way of including a lot of the ag communities in the markets, the early markets that have rolled out around the country. We have ag roots. I'm a Vermonter. I was born and raised in the islands, farming. So, that's where a lot of our ethic comes from. And we're just here to offer our support for S25 and for the amendments proposed by Rural Vermont and VGA. We've seen what's been happening in other states around the country. A lot of farmers and a lot of good participants in the industry who would be the types of folks that deserve a shot to run a cannabis business have not gotten the type of access that they deserve. And that's because the licensing hasn't really explicitly taken them into consideration or played out the impact that the licensing policies and rules and regulations would have over, a 5 to 10 year timeline. We've also seen large companies buying up medical permits and writing legislation, pushing legislation to favor those businesses and permit types, which has meant that a lot of that space that could be taken up by smaller businesses, smaller farmers, responsible local small business owners is instead taken up by large publicly traded companies. And I don't think that's the Vermont way. I don't think that's what we really want to see here. In our backyard, I think we'd rather see an industry where it's our neighbors and our friends that are participating and stand to benefit rather than every dollar that goes over the counter at a dispensary immediately going out of state. Especially right now, people need it and need the help. And I don't doubt there's no lack of agricultural expertise or know-how in this state. So a couple things to note. I'm happy to answer any questions. A note about the outdoor growing. Something to keep in mind, especially in Vermont, is that outdoor growing is a risky endeavor. We don't really know what the weather holds for us at the end of the season when there's flowers on the plants. And the damage that the product can take because of an early snowstorm or anything like that can greatly impact the price you get in market. So, for a lot of farmers, diversifying the cultivars you're growing, maybe taking a risk with a cultivar that has a longer flower cycle, but might, have a higher risk of getting damaged the later into, October, you go with it, as diversifying that with a shorter flower cycle crop on an acre, with more space, with more room, these types of strategies and just common sense that farmers put into practice become feasible. So I think that's super important to remember. You will have crop loss. It happens. Another thing to note when it comes to, selling product from the farm or anything like that, we are very confident that the state will find ways to have the technology and testing protocols required to keep consumers safe, the same way we have that with alcohol or any other substances that have controls on them. I think that is something that is very doable as long as those testing protocols and data collection opportunities are there just to track, where products coming from and when. And it's something that's very achievable and easy and straightforward. So I want to make that explicit early on with our expertise in the track and trace space. That's about all I have for an intro. I'm happy to answer any questions, but wanted to keep it brief.
Yeah.
And on topic for everyone. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. Did you want to go, Gregory, or you want us to ask questions?
Sure. Jeffrey, by the way, and thank
Yeah,
you,
Jeffrey.
Chair Starr, and senators, some familiar faces. So good to see everybody. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is, just to introduce myself for the record, Jeffrey Pizzatello, the co-founder, executive director of Vermont Growers Association. We represent the farmers and small businesses, specifically in the emerging legal cannabis space. So we have a lot of the illicit actors everywhere from every corner of the market, from processors to cultivators to even retailers. And so, very much think of us as sort of like the Vermont Brewers Association from the 1990s. We're working with our colleagues and hopefully you senators to arrive at that craft place, that marketplace that we enjoy with beer right now. So we will get there. We're hopeful. You guys have done some fantastic work. We are, again, appreciative for today. We think that it's appropriate for agriculture to be looking at cannabis. So thank you. And those who have worked to get it here. I will say that, stepping back for a moment, there aren't too many states as of this moment. There's about 15 with a regulatory marketplace, adult sales in this country. There aren't too many yet where we can point to success stories of small businesses and farmers and the sort of small producers that Vermont very much like to see with its marketplace. Similar to our maple, our cheese, and like I said, our beer. There is one state that we can point to, though, which would be analogous here, and that would be Maine. Maine's medical market, it sort of has been flying under the radar, but for several years has been small producer, craft driven. So this is their medical market, not their rec space. They have a robust industry. They have a strong network of local producers, both indoor and outdoor, that contribute to their medical space. And as of, I believe, 2019, for the year of 2019, they brought in over $220 million revenue just from the medical market, $220 million. Of that figure, something like 75 to 80% came from small businesses. I say that to give you guys some baseline as to what Vermont can expect if we embrace and engage and allow for the accessibility of our legal marketplace, very much the way that Graham was alluding to in his breakdown of some of our policy points that we are proposing today. So making farmers or allowing farmers to have more access, less regulatory obstruction, allow our craft producers to have access to licenses as soon as possible. We're seeing significant delays with implementation and formation of Act 164 right now. There's several reasons for that. And we think that, without having that conversation right now, there are several reasons for that. But what we're trying to do with this language is not just address some of those formation issues, but include Vermonters as early as possible in the rollout process. We see the medical dispensaries enjoyed a complete definition of their market position in Act 164, and that's fine. We think corporations have a role in the industry. We also think Vermonters, though, should be defined as such as well. And so accessibility, viability of market, turning this legal adult use marketplace into a uniquely Vermont marketplace is our intent here. So that's what I have to add, and I look forward to taking your questions and exploring our policies today.
Josh, you mentioned something about up to 1 acre, I think, for size. And whereas if you were growing inside, you'd use 1 acre, but outside you need 4. How many plants could you put on 1 acre outdoors, and roughly any idea on what you could raise for revenue from 1 acre?
Yeah, just want to clarify that. Any size, I meant to reference what Graham had spoken about and proposed. So if that's the 4,000 square feet to 1,000 square feet, if I said an acre, it was only about outdoor cultivation. Just to be clear on that. So depending on your spacing for an acre, depending on your spacing and how you set it up, I mean, about 1,000 plants, give or take. I mean, I don't know if you think differently, Jeffrey, but that's what I've seen in the past.
I think that's conservative, yeah, around 2,000, depending on spacing. What we find with hemp, because we have a robust hemp industry in this state, we've got talented hemp growers. They space out about 9 to 15 feet, depending upon the size they anticipate the plant getting. Lots of variations in agriculture, as we know.
Yeah, and as far as revenue goes, it depends what you're growing for, what strains you're growing. But it could be a significant, cash windfall for the farm for sure. With that type of space, tough to say what prices are due or what it would be, but I think well over, $500,000 of revenue early on in the market is a very attainable goal.
Per acre or per something, right?
Yeah, per acre. Depending on a lot of factors. I think a lot of farmers learned their lessons with hemp. So we definitely need to be conservative and also factor in some amount of crop loss, and also think about whether products are going to be turned into extracts or sold as flour. I think a lot of outdoor cultivation, it might make a lot of economic sense to turn it into extracts that could be value adds for edibles or things like that. But it's tough to say, and everyone's going to find their own way to do it for sure. But I think what's most important is that amount of space creates the room to get creative, allows the room to get creative and to strategize and to protect yourself as a farmer, to make sure that you don't take a loss.
And what about caps? We talked quite a bit. All three of you talked about putting caps on so that the big guys don't steal the whole market. What type of caps are you thinking about, or what does Maine have for caps that we could use as a judgment call? But personally, I'd certainly agree with you that if you don't put caps, corporate America will be in gobbling up the whole show. So what are you thinking about for caps to be fair?
Why don't I start quickly, and then Jeffrey, you can speak to Maine. What we've proposed is a tiered permitting system allowing up to 1 acre, which is approximately 43,500 square feet for outdoors, 22,000 square feet for mixed light, and 10,000 square feet indoors. So it's like a 1 to 2 to 4 ratio, like we said. But the smallest license, the craft license for outdoor, would be 4,000 square feet. The craft license for mixed light would be 2,000. The craft license for indoor would be 1,000. So that current standard for 1,000 square feet is the smallest license. We really think that's most appropriate for indoor, and that would have to be larger for outdoor. And actually, Jeffrey and VGA have done some research on this with local growers that he can maybe speak to discuss a little about why we came to those numbers. And I'll pass it over to him.
I have a quick question. Am I hearing that there's no limit on the size of an indoor grow operation?
There are no limits suggested, I believe, in the bill. One of the great limitations that folks did put in was on horizontal integration. So, one owner can't have a cultivation license and have sites. They can only have one site. But as far as the bill says, I believe there's no limit on the scale of that site, whether it's indoor, outdoor, or otherwise. There's actually no differentiation between indoor or in the bill.
Interesting.
Yeah, and do any of you know, or members, committee members, or I think Michelle's on too, maybe. Are there, so if there are no limits, one outfit could come in and gobble up the whole thing?
Yeah, and Jeffrey, sorry.
Oh,
Go ahead.
I'm curious. I want to have if Michelle wouldn't mind confirming, are there production caps for the integrated license type in Act 164?
There are no production caps in Act 164 for any of the cultivators. That includes integrated licensees. What's required is that the board is to develop tiers in the licensing category, specifically with regard to cultivators and retailers, but they're allowed to develop tiers for the other licensees as well. And so if those of you who remember the predecessors to S54, you had tiers within the legislation, and it had certain, how much canopy you would have for the plants, things like that. But what passed in 164 was that the board is to develop tiers. They're going to be recommending licensing fees based on those tiers to the General Assembly. The General Assembly has to adopt the fees so that they're, it makes sense. So you don't have obviously somebody with a large operation having the same kind of fee as somebody who's a small cultivator. But I think all the conversations for Act 164 were that there's going to be multiple tiers so that people can enter the market at different places. But that's something that the board is to be developing. And they have the authority to develop production caps to set the limits of, how much acreage or whatever is for each tier. So that's all responsibility of the board, and that's in the law currently.
Sorry.
And Michelle, did you look at what we heard earlier, that Maine has a pretty robust small growers? I don't know if it's a law or if it's just that they lucked out and have a lot of small growers. Have you looked into their regs and laws up in Maine at all for the other committees?
No, they haven't really gotten into the kind of minutia of details around cultivation. There is a provision in Act 164 specifically for small cultivators, and that you define small cultivators up to 1,000 square feet. And so they have a special dispensation in terms of they get early licensing, and the board is encouraged to consider a different regulatory structure for them that, maybe they don't need to comply with the same types of rules as a larger outfit, things like that. But there's nothing, but again, it's a lot of the kind of really detailed stuff around what the tiers will look like, if there's production caps, what are the size of the tiers, what are the fees, all of those types of things are to be developed by the board.
So
through rulemaking, and then also they're required to report a lot of these things back to the General Assembly so that you guys have input.
What we've just heard is that if you were gonna do a small growers thing at 1,000 square feet, that, that should be the small part of growing indoors. But if you took if you wanted to do the same production outdoors, you'd need 4 times the amount of land to grow the same amount of crops outdoors as you would inside. So if you were going to move to an outdoor grow, you would need a small cultivators provision up to 4,000 square feet. So judiciary or government ops hasn't talked about that? No. And what about the cost of a of a permit or a license, whatever they call it, for the small cultivators provision. Do you know what that would be, or is that going to be determined by the board?
No, fees can only be, as you know, fees can only be set by the General Assembly. And so the act requires the board to recommend fees to the General Assembly, and then it would be in your hands to establish the fees through legislation.
So I don't know if I'm right or not, but what I'm gathering from our little conversation here, hell, we're going to be a couple, 3 years before we ever get anything going, because you've got all these, you've got boards and you've got us mixed up in it, and the governor's mixed up. It's going to drag on forever before we get to a position where we naturally grow a crop and sell it. Is there any timetable established?
I do. I have a timeline. I'm happy to forward it to the committee, and I can send it to Linda as well. I have a timeline for Act 164. I mean, I think obviously the board, has not been seated yet. The governor's been slow in that process, and so we don't have the board yet. So I think the committees of jurisdiction are going to be looking at the timeline, whether or not anything needs to be adjusted there. But the most substantial time-consuming piece is rulemaking, which you're going to have rulemaking no matter what. And you know how long rulemaking takes through the APA, and there's really only so much you can do about that, right? And so no matter what, you're going to have the rulemaking process, and you can't start accepting applications until you've gone through rulemaking. And the rulemaking, because it is so detailed in terms of the expertise with regard to, growing the crops and then selling and all of that kind of stuff, is that through the rulemaking process, people can comment. The board will have to, respond to comments. They'll have hearings. There'll be a process through that in developing the tiers, the rules, all of that kind of stuff. And so, I think Act 164 was about 105 pages, and it left a lot to the board still, obviously. And so, that was just the legislature's choice when they passed it, was a lot of the kind of nitty gritty details with regard to how the system's going to look would be adopted through rule.
Thanks for that. Your other guys jump in if you have some questions. And Anthony?
Yeah, I think this is for Michelle, I guess, but I know you're saying that the board has the ability to develop tiers and whatnot, but I'm not sure if that's the same as saying the board shall recommend tiers and shall put production caps on things. It's one thing to say they should consider those things. I'm wondering if they have to do those things.
They have to with regard to cultivators and retailers.
Okay.
There's nothing in the bill, though, that talks about production caps. There's no mandate around production caps, but there is a requirement that they adopt tiers.
See, I think that it's very important that we put some production caps in there if we can. I don't even know what the heck we can do or can't do, but if you don't have some type of a regulatory maximum amount, you can kiss the little guys pretty much goodbye.
Right.
It'll turn out like our dairy farms. If you don't keep getting bigger, you seem to fall by the wayside. And in the Ag Committee, we're trying to enhance our smaller operators and diversify and because we like to have a lot of people around and
well,
Chris,
I think there. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Michelle.
I was just going to say, there is language in Act 164 about the preference for small cultivators with regard to the system and elevating small cultivators over larger production facilities. I think if you, again, historically looking at the legislation that's been worked on and looking at like what other states have done, what the legislature envisioned with Act 164 is that the board is going to be looking at, what is Vermont's current capacity for, the market, right? Then they're going to figure out that. Then they're going to figure out production caps, and they're going to divvy up it into how many grow facilities and how many licenses and how much land is going to be used. I don't know if you remember a few years ago when there were those types of provisions in legislation that eventually didn't pass the House, but passed the Senate, is that we were working with the RAND report because we had that study that was done that's really, can't really use it now because at the time there weren't any other states in New England that had a legal cannabis market. And so they were kind of basing the numbers and the capacity for sales in Vermont, based on a lot of people coming to Vermont who couldn't access it in their home state. So we have to use different numbers now, but, JFO worked with all of that to think about, how much supply should there be? How do you divvy that up amongst all of the licenses? Like all of that kind of stuff. So I think we've always assumed that that's going to be part of the process, part of the board's process in recommending the tiers and the fees and that sort of thing.
So do you think or feel that on the different tiers that they could put certain cap limits on how much they could cultivate?
Yeah, they have the authority to do that. Yep.
So it would enhance, you could enhance the growers from the smallest tier, give them so much. So I don't even know how they sell this stuff by the pound or ounce or plants, but they could sell X number, but as you get up higher, you'd cut that number back so that the level 3 or level 4 tiers, they would only be able to do X number pounds per acre or something. But that's all.
Right. And who knows? It's a new board, but my recollection was when y'all had passed the Senate bill that had established the tiers and the size of the blocks and stuff like that. I think I'll have to go back, but where we weren't talking like acres, we weren't talking huge tiers at all. So I guess anything's possible with this new board, but we weren't taught, my recollection was that the smallest tier at the time, the smallest tier in Massachusetts was what the Vermont Senate had proposed as the largest tier in Vermont. So I think the scale of what's been discussed historically is way smaller. You can certainly add something in that just requires them to have production caps, but there's nothing that prevents them from doing that now. And I think that's always just been understood that's just part of what they would do in creating the licensing.
So committee, Chris, go ahead but be thinking about what we may want to ask Michelle about maybe offering to Senator Sears. But go ahead, Chris.
I guess just a comment and maybe ask the panel to reflect on this. S54 was not the bill I wanted. It was not the bill the Senate wanted. We had to compromise getting it through the House, where the Speaker of the House was openly opposed. The governor was not enthusiastic. This is a product of compromise, and that's unfortunately sometimes the way the legislature works. So, I'm very supportive of a bunch of what you've laid out, but I guess I have just a strategic question and also just, Michelle, check my understanding here. Most of what you're talking about, the production limits, the delineation between indoor, outdoor, the idea that we decentralize this actually is not precluded. When we couldn't lay it down in the law, we, in many cases, the best we could get was to push the question to the Cannabis Control Board. And so I'm wondering, and then specifically on the ag questions, this is a committee that has basically agreed with you. The Senate has basically agreed with you. We run into a buzzsaw on the other side of people who are very powerful, and we're never going to get around the Janet Ansels of the world. Graham, I think she's your rep, if I recall. So I guess my question is, I understand you bringing it to us. You should do that. That's your job to advocate. But in terms of a strategy, how much have you been talking to folks in House Ways and Means, and how much of this, since I think we've enabled the opportunity for what you're saying, but we haven't written it in law, most of this I think could be determined by the board if that process goes the way we want it. And in fact, a lot of it is sort of described if you look at the history of what we're aiming for, and you look at the tiers, and the language behind the tiers. Sometimes boards don't do what we want, but they would be really going against the history of the debate here. And I don't see the governor's appointees being motivated that way. So I guess my question is, we're never going to have on-farm sales in the way you're envisioning, because we don't have on-farm distilleries, handing out gin, right? We have handled that in a different way for all sorts of good.
Wineries can sell wine now.
Yeah, but and so can a farm, but they have to get the license, and so does a winery, right? That's so in that way, it's a good parallel to what we have. Yeah. But basically, my question is, have you been lobbying the people that are actually opposed to this in the other half of the legislative process? And isn't it true that you could successfully bring most of these points to the Cannabis Control Board and get what you're after?
I'm happy to take that first, if my colleagues don't mind. There's a lot to unpack there, and I think that generally, Senator Pearson, you are correct that the framework is there. But what we've seen in other states, and this is the concern that we're bringing to your committee and other committees over the past couple of days, is that in Massachusetts, for instance, this happened in Michigan, this happened in Oregon. There are instances now where we can turn to the formation and rollout of adult use marketplaces, and these new agencies simply being overburdened with too much to do. And so that happened in Massachusetts, and as a result, their licensing process, so their board formed, albeit late, but their licensing process dragged its feet on issuing licenses. So as a result, after about 3.5 years, there was a fraction of small businesses, not to mention people of color, that own businesses in their marketplace. So we're looking to prevent that. And we, in recognizing that the formation is already significantly behind. Now, we said for whatever reason, whether it's the governor or whatnot, but the process itself is already behind. So we're trying to be as preventative as possible. And we can also turn to we'll stay with Massachusetts for a moment. What are they doing to try to rectify these issues that they have with the implementation and equity in their marketplace? They are moving to seeking to address them using their legislative body. I'll give you an example. Their recent solution to address their licensing issues was to introduce through a bill a more equitable license so small businesses can participate, because they realized after about 3 years, what Massachusetts has is their Cannabis Control Commission. They have a commission. It's more than 3 people, but it was a legislative fix to an agency that was not operating, and they had milestones and they had objectives, and so we're not impugning a board that has not formed yet in Vermont. We're simply saying this has happened in other states. Let's at least consider it, that it could happen here in Vermont, and let's maybe try to account for it if we can. So that speaks to that concern. If I can
Well, help me understand that, because we mandate that there are different tiers of license. We mandate that the small folks go first. So you're right. We don't know. These people don't exist. They've never met. We don't know their motivation. But what better protection could we offer than mandating the
Set it right in law.
Well, but we
I
did. But we did set that in law, Bobby. We said, you'll have the small cultivators. They will go first. Those are laws.
No numbers though, Chris.
No, we
No.
did 1,000 square feet. That is in law, and then the board may have tiers beyond that. So I'm not trying to argue with you. I just I sort of, it's my habit to try to take the normal people's words and put it into this process, which is not normal. And I'm wrestling with that, because I feel like a lot of what you're asking for is there. We got to keep our eye on it. You guys, I trust you to advocate in front of the board. And I'll join you if it seems like they're going sideways. But so just on the small cultivator and the upfront, I mean, that's in the law. Where's the risk in us missing that? We have tried to learn from Massachusetts, and in Massachusetts, of course, the voters pushed it, and then the legislature, in a cranky way, set it up. That's different. We've had a cleaner path that way, I guess.
If we had, we set up the dairy guys in tiers. We have 4 tiers, right? Small, certified, medium, and large. Well, if we set this up in tiers and we set it up, that, and let the board work within those parameters, but we only set the smallest tier. So if you went from 0 to 1,000 square feet for the smallest tier, then we would have to talk about, well, what's the second tier? And we know somebody said you could pop out $500,000 out of that smallest tier. No,
Just to clarify, that's a very poor approximation of what the economic value an acre could potentially create in our
it's an
market.
acre.
Yeah, and that would be for outdoor cultivation. And so I think it's tricky, because there's these differentiations between indoor growing, mixed light growing, outdoor growing that you don't necessarily have with other crops. But it's super important. And I also want to say, defining the largest tier may matter more than defining the smallest tier.
Yeah.
Because that market analysis that Michelle mentioned a second ago, that was done and needs to continue to be done by the rule makers and the regulators, is also being done by the large public corporations that own 3 out of 5 medical permits within the state currently. And they have access to, debt markets and everything else that enable them to access liquidity and financing that our small farmers can't even dream of. And if they have an economic incentive to invest in cultivation and sell their own product rather than the product of local farmers, they will. That is just the reality of them getting the best returns for their shareholders, which is their purpose in this business. So, I think that's very important to remember who we are trying to protect here. And right now, my understanding of Act 164 is that there is a defined path to market and establishment for the vertically integrated permits, but there is not one for the craft permits or for smaller scale permits, so that there feasibly is a scenario where delays in the CCB make it so that only vertically integrated companies are able to establish their lines of business, while it's only the craft producers who get delayed. Correct me if I'm wrong, anyone, please, but that's my current understanding.
So they've already got their teeth into the meat then. So what, like Maine, what is their largest tier, or what is a big thing in Maine, big plot? How much property?
Great question. Let me just contrast for a moment. New Jersey just passed Tax and Rec. Their smallest tier that they identified, which they call a micro tier for mom and pop to get in, is 2,500 square feet. Our smallest tier originally in S54 was 500 square feet. 500 square feet. We fought to push it up to 1,000. Why did we do that? Because we take an annual survey every year of cannabis, of the cannabis community in Vermont. The average square foot of an indoor grow that we were told by Vermonters is approximately 1,200 square feet. So if we're trying to transition people who are currently growing, we don't want them to say, cut your grow in half just to, right? They'll never participate. But to speak to the larger side for a moment, one reason why we don't see production caps for large grows, as Michelle had pointed out, the dispensaries do not have a production cap, albeit they can craft one, they can develop one in when the CCB eventually forms. But there's just to provide some insight for a moment. You know, I'm a professional cannabis grower. There are two central issues at the heart of every legal cannabis company that touches the plant. Those two items are IP and SOP. IP is intellectual property or genetics. SOP, standard operating procedure, or how you do something. These corporations, this happened in Massachusetts, this happened in every state. They push to grow indoor primarily and define that so they can get going immediately with no production caps, because they do not have IP for outdoor and they don't have SOP for outdoor. They only grow inside. So they're comfortable with 30,000 square feet indoor grows. We don't think that's appropriate for Vermont.
So what should the footage be though? If we were gonna suggest caps to judiciary and say, look, you know, we've got farms here with 4,000 cows, which are big, and we've got farms with 30 cows, which is small. What would we know what small is? It's 1,000 square feet, but we don't know where the top end should be, so we can regulate that so that those guys don't take over the total market. Michelle?
I wanted to correct one thing, which is that the dispensaries are capped. Their production limits are tied to their designated patients. So they have to, if you are a patient on the registry, you're required to designate which registry and which dispensary and only one dispensary that you obtain your cannabis and cannabis products from. And then that number of patients per dispensary, there's a formula in the existing law that translates to how much the dispensary can cultivate. And so it's tied to basically the personal cultivation amount for patients and caregivers. And so there is a cap currently on dispensaries. And I just went back and looked at when the Senate passed S241 in 2016, and you did establish the tiers. The largest tier that you established was for a space of 5,001 to 10,000 square feet. So the largest tier was a maximum of 10,000 square feet. So just again, a little history of, because there's so much here in terms of work that's been done over the last 6 or 7 years, whether it's by the legislature or by the administration, or we had that study committee that the governor put together. There's a lot that's gone on. So just because the largest tier was a max of 10,000 square feet a few years ago, doesn't mean that that's what the board would come up with. But I just wanted to give you kind of an idea of the universe of the scale of what's been discussed over the last several years.
Yeah, Michelle, is that 5,000 to 10,000 square feet indoor or outdoor?
They did not make a distinction. And so, again, that's one of the things that is, is for under current law is for the board to be making those distinctions. And I think the assumption has been, because this is the way it is in other states, is that there's going to be certain scale for indoor grow and another scale for outdoor grow, and that those things are all going to be factors that are considered by the board in developing the tiers.
See, because if you took what we've heard earlier today, if you had 10,000 square feet indoor, that means you would need 40,000 square feet outdoors to grow roughly the same product. Well, 40,000 square feet's an acre or almost an acre. So, we already talked about, like, if you had the 1,000 square feet indoor for the small grower, you would need 4,000 square feet outdoor. But the range right now is from 1,000 to 10,000 for, I don't know how many tiers, 4 tiers. So, you got 1, 3, 6, and 10 or something like that.
What are the 4 tiers? Where are the 4 tiers?
We have 4 tiers, right? You said
We don't have any tiers.
Oh, we don't
now.
have it. Well, what
No,
about
the
that?
board, the board is developing tiers.
Oh. Well,
That's why, so
there's been-
I think what you're talking about in terms of the indoor versus outdoor, and you need the different space requirements, and the discussion of should the rules be the same for indoor versus outdoor, and that's the stuff that previously the legislature got kind of bogged down in, the technicality of that, and why they chose to have those issues addressed by the board in the last legislation is because there wasn't necessarily agreement on establishing those within the General Assembly. And so I think those things are all in the mix. And I think as Senator Pearson, I kind of mentioned before, were contemplated that the board would be discussing all of that. I think by nature of that, it's not in Act 164 doesn't mean that it's not going to be done. And you can certainly choose to add that stuff in if you want to. But as you know, this bill has not typically been in the agriculture committees, although it did hit 11 committees in the House last year or the year before. And so
the 1,000 square feet is not in the law, right? That's
the one thing that is in the law. And I emailed to the committee just the language in current law for small cultivators. And so that you can take a look at that and see what advantages small cultivators have. And that was because the legislature, while they didn't want to establish all the tiers, they did want to be clear about a preference for small cultivators. And they identified that as 1,000 square feet.
So what do you think about doing the top end and letting the board work in between? I mean, if we don't curb the top end, that's like Josh said, that's the important part, is the top end, not the bottom end. So the big guys don't run away with the whole show.
I agree. I think it's really important that we do top tier, production limits, whatever we want to call them, but we need to set a limit on how large someone can be. So, and I know that it's possible that the board will consider that question, but I think we have to say that they shall, in fact, set an upper limit.
But do we tell them what that limit is, or do we let them decide?
No,
I don't think we can tell them, given that we only have until tomorrow to figure it out. Realistically, but I think we need to know that there's going to be a limit that is going to be, I don't know, maybe there's some wording we could use to make it clear what we're intending to do, but there should be an upper production limit or
Why do you say that, Anthony? The bill hasn't gone anywhere yet, has it? Still in Senator Sears's room. Why don't we offer a suggestion to Senator Sears that we feel very strongly in regards to putting an upper limit on the tiers?
And the limit shall be whatever?
Well, I think it should be, well, Michelle talked about 5 to 10,000, right, Michelle? You're muted.
Sorry, that was what it was a few years ago. Again, those tiers were based on the data that was provided by the RAND report, which is pretty outdated at this point now that we have active, markets in New England, and we also have personal grow is legal. So with the changing nature of it, I don't know. I wouldn't be the one to tell you if that's still appropriate or not. No matter what, don't be concerned that there won't be a cap.
Well,
There's going to be whatever they choose to be their highest tier. They'll say, you can only grow this much product, or you can only have this much land attributed to it, or whatever. There will be a cap. These things will come before the General Assembly for your input through the regular process, through reporting requirements that they have, plus also through LCAR, because everything has to go in front of LCAR. But you can certainly just, if you want to pick something and say in there, small cultivators, are 1,000 square feet or less, and there shall be no tier that is above X number of square feet. You can certainly do that.
Well, I have a lot more faith in my colleagues having to be elected every 2 years than I have in a board that's only going to be appointed maybe on 3-year terms and aren't accountable to anybody but the person that appoints them. We as legislators are elected to make decisions for our constituents, and those appointed boards are nice, but they get paid too much to go to their meetings. And so anyways, what do you guys think, Chris?
I'd like to ask Jeffrey a question. You said you're a grower. Is that in the medical realm?
No, it's not.
Okay. All right. So there's a scale question, right? I guess I think we've all spent many years actually trying hard to make sure we're sort of at a Vermont scale and not pushing corporate weed. But there is a scale question, right? So if we're aiming to bring illicit growers like you into the legal marketplace, how should we worry that, where would we set the cap where we're not going to actually make it more expensive for the licensed growers, so that we continue to see a robust illicit market? You see my point? There is a point there, and I have no idea how we figure out where it is. I'd love your advice on that one.
Thank you for the question, Senator. I actually think that to give credit to my colleagues, we did an outstanding job researching what other states did and arrived at those figures in our proposed language. So what we sent you, 10,000 square feet indoors and approximately 40,000 or an acre outside would be sound for this state, in not just ensuring that there's a proper place for the large players who are currently operating in the state. There's a place for them, but also that would be welcoming for the illicit actors. And mind you, you guys, if we move in this direction, there's lots of interconnectivity here. You will see revenue faster. You will materialize progress faster by including these people. So that's what I would suggest, Senator Pearson, would be those numbers in our proposed language.
So what is I'm intrigued that you have all hammered on this indoor versus outdoor, because it's something that I was really hoping the legislature would deal with, and we didn't deal with. We could not get it through the other body, right? So I'll keep blaming them because they deserve the blame. Is it more important that we set a cap, or is it more important that we open the door to a distinction between indoor and outdoor? We don't get everything we want in this business. So if you could only pick one of those, do you have a preference?
I think it's important at this point in time to cap the large producers for several reasons, but mostly for viability. We're not thinking about not just this year, but 2, 3, 4 years down the line.
Okay, thanks.
So, Chris, why, I mean, if we're gonna bite the bullet, let's bite it and go with this. I'd like to raise the small guy up to 1,500 square feet rather than 1,500 rather than at 1,000. And so set the bottom limit at 1,500 square feet and set the top at no greater than 10,000 square feet and have these both for indoors.
Well,
And
the reason why, not the merits, is this was a law that was enacted 5 months ago. We weren't at all sure it would cross the finish line. It limped across the finish line and was allowed to become law without a signature. I mean, so there is a risk to other provisions that I know Senate Judiciary is working on. The more we load this up with revisiting decisions that were not finished even 6 months ago, I think you jeopardize the whole thing. So that's the reason, not on the merits.
Well, we can just, we can just give recommendations too to Senator Sears. He doesn't have to necessarily act on them, but at least we can give him a recommendation. And I'm agreeing with the chair, and I think Senator Pulliam, in fact, I think you're agreeing too, Senator Pearson, that the most important cap is the large one. And we can argue about what that cap is all day, but it seems like we've had pretty good evidence from folks here about what the number should be. And it's flexible, I'm sure, in Senator Sears' mind, and also flexible as we enter into this process. I mean, as Michelle pointed out, the RAND report had numbers that really aren't applicable anymore because so much time has gone by and the surrounding neighboring landscape has changed so much. So just because we say it's 10,000 square feet today doesn't mean that a future legislative session couldn't change that number.
Graham, do you agree on that the cap is more important than the outdoor? I'm very interested in the outdoor because there's a climate piece to it and there is a very clear diversification. If we're really interested in current farmers diversifying, I think the outdoor thing is more important. We couldn't get the House to go for it. What do you think from the farmer perspective, Graham, from not, people that we hope to bring into the market?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. I'm thinking back to the question you asked, I don't know, less than 15 minutes ago at this point, just about the different, what we're asking versus what the CCB has already been asked to do. And I think if we're not certain on the numbers, or if you really think the numbers are going to crash the whole process, we put these numbers out here because we think they're right. We think they're appropriate. And like you said, Senator Pearson, you have concerns about the process too. Your question to me before was one about Janet Ansel and the work we've done on the House side and with some components, but also about how we could word this for the CCB. To me, I think we need both. There needs to be an indoor-outdoor distinction, and as Ledge Council suggested, hopefully there will be. It seems to have been how it's gone in all states. What we're concerned about is that as Senator Starr has said, we really don't know who the CCB is or what they're going to do, and they're going to be under a lot of pressure and a tight timeline to get something going. So we have the numbers we proposed. They're there. That's our recommendation. If you were to decide that you simply wanted to make a recommendation to the CCB because it would seem more palatable, one of the main issues I see is that the language should be shall. The CCB shall make the distinction between indoor, outdoor, and mixed light. The CCB shall institute not just tiers, but because like a tier could be growing an acre or more. You could say like the tiers should include production caps. And it sounds like what you're saying, Senator Pearson, is that's probably what's going to happen because we've seen that in the legislature before. There's been a lot of fights over what the caps will be. You know, I think one of our concerns is when we see the 1,000 square foot articulated in the legislation, that doesn't just make a distinction between indoor, outdoor, or mixed light. And it would make a significant difference depending on how it was interpreted. So that's why it's really important for us to differentiate between those things. I haven't spoken with, but I've been corresponding with Janet Ansell a little bit. And her straight up comment was basically like, I am not part of the agriculture committee. I deal with stuff with money. You know, I'm part of these committees. If there's a money issue, it's going to come my way. It's sort of like kicking the can down the road, she didn't give me a direct response. I've sent her the proposed amendments and she hasn't gotten back about the specific details of them and whether to support them or not. We have spoken with House Ag, similarly to how we did with you and the members there when we introduced ourselves this year. And Chair Partridge in particular expressed her concerns around us wanting to make outdoor production agricultural use. And I know that we've really got into focusing on the numbers here of like the square footage and indoor, outdoor, but I would also direct you back to what I said was one of our primary concerns, which is that none of this is considered agricultural, which means that farmers, if they have land, if all their farmland is in agricultural easement, or if all their left farmland is in current use, currently they'd only be able to use 1,000 square feet of what's in current use for production. And that is a big concern of ours, and I don't understand. And that's what I think is actually even a greater concern, hopefully, to this committee, is because you all know how much farmers work to put their land into ag easements, put their land into current use to achieve, a greater measure of farm viability. Or folks who are trying to access land like myself, we're looking for land that is where it's going to can be valued at agricultural value as opposed to at commercial value. So that's also a great concern, is that all that land is basically off the board for participation. And what Chair Partridge shared with us is that Ledge Council said to her there should be a firewall between all farm businesses and this industry because she was concerned about civil and criminal asset forfeiture. Now, in some discussions, we have not seen evidence of that happening anywhere in the country, as far as I know, in relationship to the recreational market. And we've also heard concerns expressed by Jeanette White, Senator White, about nuisance and potentially anything that's considered agricultural being immune from, local regulation, but also nuisance complaints. And I think that the right to farm law makes some distinctions there. But what I'm seeing sort of held up is someone concerned about the smell of a neighbor's plants versus a whole suite of people's ability to even participate in an industry. And to me, there's a big disparity there and a concern. And I think that the local control piece, we're just talking about what we're recommending up to an acre of production. Like we're not, and only outdoor would be considered agricultural. So we've really tried to put some limitations on it, which I think make it more reasonable and hopefully palatable, but also make a real significant difference in the lives of people who that's the land they have available to them. So I guess those are sort of my response.
Graham, thank you. That is basically what House Natural Resources proposed last year, right? Basically this indoor-outdoor split. I thought it was a great idea. And it was killed in Ways and Means, where they only deal with money. So, I don't mean to be a pain in the butt here. It's just that we can only deal with so much, and this is where I'm getting frustrated because I feel like we're on a treadmill.
Well, you got to bite the bullet there, Chris. Yeah,
Senator Pearson,
we get paid the big bucks to make these decisions, and we got to bite the bullet and go for it.
I've filed plenty of fruitless political bills, Mr. Chair. It's just how much energy I can muster.
Yeah, we already got our plate pretty full.
I also just want to let you know, Senator.
Bobby, I've got another meeting in about 10 minutes. So are we going to continue doing this tomorrow or what's your pleasure?
Tom- Tomorrow is. Yeah, Linda, do we have 67 on the schedule? Are these people all lined up for tomorrow?
Yes.
Could we,
They may not take, I scheduled them for an hour and 15 minutes. And then the maple issue is an hour and a half. I don't know if there's room in there.
that won't take that long either. I think we could start at 11 tomorrow. We'd have an hour tomorrow or a little more if we run into the noon time.
Okay.
I didn't know if there was anything that we would like to ask Michelle to look at or to put together, just, to have, because you guys that are here testifying, you aren't going to get the whole pickup load. I hope you understand that. But if we can get 2 or 3 key things and get that down to Senator Sears, he might agree to try to move that. And so that outdoor issue is something I think we should deal with. We should deal with a cap at the top so that the big guys aren't going to steal all the market. And I would like to see the bottom end raised a little bit so that we would make sure that if somebody wanted to go to that limit, they could make a buck or two as a small producer. But you guys can talk about that and whatever else you want to go for. But then tomorrow we got to bite the bullet and either do something or nothing. But I'd like to do something to help our small producers, and I'd like to do something else to cap out anyone, regardless of who they are, from taking the whole market. So I guess.
Michelle has her hand up. Michelle has her hand up.
Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Bobby. I just wanted to ask a question just because I'm, as you can imagine, as we're heading towards the drop dead deadline, I'm pretty just booked up straight out tomorrow, but I'm wondering about, and so I'm not available at 11 tomorrow, but I can circle back with you or with Chris afterwards. But I'm wondering if for your discussion tomorrow, so you had indicated an interest in increasing the small cultivation to 1,500 and the idea of implementing a cap and just saying, no tier can be more than 10,000 square feet. That's something I can do tonight,
Yep.
and write up and send to y'all so that you can have it for discussion tomorrow. And then if you start to explore the indoor outdoor thing, and is it that you're interested in looking again at what the original House proposal on indoor outdoor grow? I mean, I can dig up that language and send it to you if that's helpful. Or I'm just trying to figure out how can I set you up tomorrow to have a good conversation if you don't have counsel.
You'd be amazed at the good conversations we have.
Yes, I'm sure. I don't mean to insinuate that you need me. I'm just trying to make sure that you've got whatever you need to do your thing.
I'm just kidding. Would you guys? I think is there something else that I missed that you guys would like to have Michelle look at?
No.
I think we're good, Michelle. We do the small, the large, and I think, you guys, are most of your small people going to be growing outdoors or indoors?
Good question. Our last policy survey, which was from last year, it's about 60-40 is what Vermonters are telling us. 60% outdoor, 40% indoor, broad numbers. And I believe that Graham did want to pop in and say something.
Yeah, I just wanted to suggest that maybe one consideration, Senator Sears, for Michelle is to actually just take our recommendation and you could accomplish the indoor-outdoor distinction and the caps in the same language. Just say, you know, the cap for outdoor would be X, the cap for indoor would be Y. And I just wanted to, you know, I'm curious to hear some of the response to the agricultural designation concern I brought up. And I do hear you, Senator Pearson, and perhaps it's best for us all to figure out who on the House side. I know you've suggested some, and I have touched base with them, but we keep getting this sort of go talk to somebody else thing. Is it possible for us all to have a conversation with some of these people so that we can at least get on the same page and not, we're putting so much work to go from committee to committee to try to do this, and it sounds like there's some people just who you feel are standing in the way or who just aren't going to approve it. Can we all get in a room and have a conversation about this? I'm just trying to figure out, you know, how we can work together to accomplish some of the things we seem to agree on.
Well,
And I also want to say, Maddie Kempner is now here as well from NOFA Vermont. She's a part of our coalition. I didn't know if she wanted a chance to speak.
Who did you want to work together with, Graham?
Well, Senator Pearson specifically suggested, you know, Chair Ansel in the House side, and I think there's some other folks in the House we suggested in the past. Yeah, no working with them.
Well, I mean, it's not that there's no working with them. We have offered them most of the ideas you're bringing forward, and they've rejected them. So
it's you that's got to work with them.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I want to pipe in here and say, this is our chance, you know, getting some of these changes through your committee. I'm so grateful that we're having this conversation, and I honestly don't have too much to add. I just really support the recommendations that the coalition is bringing forward. And I think your committee really moving some of these things forward through S25 is absolutely the best chance we have to then be the advocates that we need to be able to be on the House side, and hopefully get ourselves in front of the Agriculture Committee, which is just a conversation that we have not been able to have. And I think that the folks that we represent are really in the best position to be strong advocates and take some of that that work off of your all's plate and trying to move these forward. I think if we have an opening, we will carry it forward, and we're excited to do that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way it works. Yeah, we can go over there and talk, but they won't listen. You know, we talk, they don't hear us. They're different.
That works for us too, but we'll keep at it.
Well, you guys, you know, you're advocates, and that's your job. But so Michelle, I think we're okay with what you suggested that you could do for us, and
okay.
and certainly appreciate your time and expertise on this. That's for sure. Yeah, so you'll send that to Linda, Michelle, or?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. And are you guys committee all set?
Well, are we saying that we're going to meet again on this tomorrow, and are Graham and others going to be invited back to be part of that conversation?
We should vote on that. No, you're more than welcome to come back if you can at 11 o'clock. We'll try to spend another hour on the, you know, figuring that out at the tail end. So you guys, Linda will send you an invitation with a number, and hopefully you can come back, you know, tomorrow, and we'll try to formalize Michelle's suggestions, and then we can get it over to Senator Sears.
Good.
Okay, so if there isn't anything else, thanks everybody for your time, and hopefully we'll get something done.